Guys, welcome back to this channel. So in this video we will discuss about how we can implement authentication in Next.js 13. In my previous video I have discussed all about Next.js 13. We have learned all the new features that are introduced in Next.js 13. If you haven't watched that video, please watch that video first and then come back to this video. That will make more sense. So here we have a simple a header that contains a login button. Okay, if I go to login, I can log in here with my email and the password, and I can also register my account here. I type here like test, and I type here test@gmail.com. I type here password 123456, click on register, and if I go to the inspect and go to console, you can see that here the user is registered successfully. Okay, so now let's log in. If I go to login, I can enter here my email, which is test@gmail.com, and I type here my password 123456. If I type here 7 and click on sign in, you can see that we get here our error that invalid email or password. If I type here correct password, click on sign in, and now the user is logged in. We get here okay, true, and also you can see that we have here user in the header hi test, and also you can see the logout button here. Okay, and if I simply log out, now the user is logged out. And there is one route which is /dashboard, which is a protected route. If I go to that route without logging in, you can see that we are moved back to the login page because this route is protected. We have to log in. So I type here test, and then I type here 123456. Now if I sign in, sorry, that is test@gmail.com, sign in. So now if I go to this dashboard, you can see that now I can access that protected route. So in this video we will learn that how we can register a user, save that in the database, how we can authenticate the user with its credentials with NextAuth, how we can maintain the session of the user, how we can get access to the session of the user and display that user in the header, and also how we can protect our routes from the unauthenticated users. For that, I have already created a boilerplate, and you can get that code from my GitHub profile. So you can find the link in the description of this video also. So this is the GitHub repo, which is NextAuth 13, that contains the boilerplate code. You can simply select the branch with the name initial code and get the code from here. Okay, so I go back, and in that I have simply just have an app folder. If you haven't watched my previous video, make sure that you watch that video so you know that how Next.js 13 works. And in that I simply have a simple page.js that have a simple div tag. Then I have a layout.js that contains the basic code. I have created a header component here that contains the header. Let me also run the project first. So I type here npm run dev. I have just created this boilerplate to just save some time. So now I will go to my Chrome, and here you can see that this is the basic app. So this is our header. I have simple here Next.js 13 authentication in the header. Then I have here the name of the user, then login and logout button. Okay, so this is a simple header, and I have used Bootstrap for that. Okay, so this is a simple header, and we have used that header in our layout right here. Okay, and then we have here head.js that contains our Bootstrap CDN and then also the font awesome CDN. If you want to use any font awesome, I haven't used that, but you can also use that. Okay, so I simply close this head.js, and now I have here two folders with the login and register. If you don't know, in Next.js 13 we create a folder in our app directory, and then in each folder we create a page.js file that represents that route like /login or /register. So in the login I have a simple form that contains two fields, one for the email and one for the password, and then a simple submit button, and that button will take us to the submit handler. And we have also given on change to each field for email and for the password. I hope that you know the basics of React. And again, if you haven't watched my previous video or Next.js 13, please do watch that first. And the same way we have the register form that contains three fields. It is pretty much same form, but with one additional field, that is the name, then email, and the password. Okay, and you can see that I have used here use client because these are client components, not server components. So we have to make them client components because we have to use here use state and all that stuff of the front end. Okay, so make sure that these components are the client components, not the server components, and I have also discussed that in my previous video. So if I go back and if I click on this login, And you can see that we here have a simple form with the email and password field, and then for the register we have this form. Okay, so this is a simple app in which we discuss about how we can register a user and save that in the database, and then we will use NextAuth to validate the user, and then we will maintain the session of that user. Okay, so I hope that you understand. This is a basic simple code and just a boilerplate to start this video. So now let's first of all connect to our database and then register a new user. So I will use MongoDB for this video. So I simply first of all install all my required packages. So I type here npm I axios, then I type here mongoose, then I will use here bcrypt to encrypt my password. Okay, so axios, mongoose, bcrypt, and I also use here Next-Auth that we will use for the authentication. So simply install all my packages. I have typed wrong spellings of mongoose, so I correct that. So all packages are installed successfully. I simply run my server again. And now let's start working on our project. So first of all, I go to my next.config.js and add here my database connection string. So simply type here env. In that I have to type here db underscore URI underscore URI, and then the string is going to be MongoDB. Then localhost, I use here 27017, which is the default port, and for the database name I type here next 13-auth. Okay, so this is our database connection string for the mongoose, and then I use here next auth underscore secret. Okay, so we have to also add that. I type here, make sure to add a strong secret here. I type here coding with Abbas. Okay, so I'm gonna save it, and now we have added both the environment variables and we will use that in our project. I simply restart my server, and now first of all let's create here our config file to connect to our database. So new folder with the name config, and I type here db connect.js. And now here I first of all import mongoose from mongoose, and then I will simply db connect, create a function here, and I will simply export default this db connect. Okay, so now in this function I will connect to my database. So it's first of all check that if mongoose dot connection dot ready state is greater than equal to 1, then simply return, otherwise we will connect to our database. So I type here mongoose dot connect, and in that we have to pass the connection string, and we will get that string from our env file. So type here process dot env dot db underscore URI. Okay, and now if I simply save this one, and now our db connect is ready. Okay, so I simply close this one, and now let's create our user model, and then we will register our user. So in the root I create a new folder with the name models. In that I create a new model that is user.js, and I will create here my mongoose model. So I first of all import the mongoose, and then I will import here the bcrypt because I also want to encrypt my password. Bcrypt from bcrypt.js, then user, okay, is equal to new mongoose dot schema. In that I will pass all the fields that I want to create in this schema or model. So in this case I will make it simple, just name, that is going to be string, then I type here email, that is also going to be string, and then the password, that is also going to be string. You can also add multiple validations like for the email and the password, but I will make it simple. And then we simply have to export it. So export default mongoose dot models dot user. Will check that if mongoose dot models dot user exists, then we will use that, otherwise we will simply use here mongoose dot model the user. Okay, because if you don't type here this part, it will throw the error that the schema already exists. So we have to make sure that if there is already user, then we will simply use that. Otherwise we will use this model to make one. And now we also have to encrypt the password before saving that in the database. So for that I will use here the pre method. So I use here user schema dot pre, and then the method which is the save. So before save it will run this code. So in that I will simply type here async function. Okay, in that I have here the next. So before saving the user in the database, it will run this code, and in that I will check that if this, now this here represents the user itself. Okay, so if this dot is modified, I check that if password is not modified, then we will simply return here the next, and we will move on, because if the password is not modified, then we don't have to actually move on. So we simply type here the next, that will move on to the next middleware. And if the password is modified, then I will use here this dot password is equal to await bcrypt dot hash, and in that hash I will simply type here the string that I want to hash. This time this is the this dot password, and I type here the salt value. I type here 10, which is the default value also as well. Okay, so it will check that if the password is not modified, then we'll simply move on to the next middleware, and if the password is modified, then we will simply use here this hash to encrypt our password, and it will set the password here. So in this way it will encrypt the password before saving that user in the database. Simply save it. Now our user model is ready. Now let's actually create our API endpoint to register our user. So I close this one. I go to the pages. In the API I delete this hello.js because we don't need that here, and I create a new in the API I create here a new file that is register.js. So that route is going to be /API/register. Now in that I first of all import the user from the user model. So dot slash, I go to the models slash the user. Okay, and then I also need here the db connect because I also want to connect to database. So import db connect from config slash db connect. Okay, and then I will simply export default export here a function which is the handler. In that I will get access to the request and the response object, and then in that I will simply check that if request dot method is equal to post. This means that this is a post request, and then we need to first of all db connect to our database, and then we have to get the name, email, and the password from the request.body that will be passed in our request from the front end. Okay, and then we have to create the user. So simply type here const user is equal to await user dot create, and in that create I have to pass all the fields, so name, email, and then the password. Now you can also add the validations before creating the user. That's totally on you. And now I will simply type here res dot status. I type here 201 that is created, and then I pass here in the JSON the user that is just created. So type here the user. Simply save this one. And now our endpoint is ready. Now let's go to our front end and register the user. I simply close this one, and if I go to my app in the register, we have this page.js. So you can see that we have already added the on change to all our fields for the name, email, and then the password. We have created our use state here. Okay, now on submit it will use this submit handler, which is here, that will just basically just prevent the default. Let me type here first of all log name, email, and then the password. Okay, if I save it and go back to my Chrome, and if I simply reload this page once, I type here like my name, then I type here a password 123456, click on register and go to the console. You will see here I get here the name, email, and then the password, and we get here a warning for just a warning that we have to use here HTML before instead of this for. So I go back and I type here HTML4 and also have to copy that and put that here and also here. Simply save it. Now we have name, email and password in this function. Now let's pass them on the backend to our route. So I simply first of all type here try catch, and then I will simply log here if there is any error. Okay, and then I will simply send the request. So I use here axios that will give me back the data. So await axios dot get post, that is a post request, and the post we have to pass here first of all the route name, that is slash api slash register. Okay, then we have to pass our data in that in the body. So I will type here name, email and then the password. Okay, then I log here the data like this. Okay, and also I make this function async because this we have used await in that. And now let's test our code. I go back, and if I go to the inspect again and clear my terminal, console, and now if I click on register, you will see that we get back here our user that contains the name, email and the encrypted password, and also the ID of the user that Mongoose will give it. Now we are successfully creating our user and saving that in the database. Now let's handle the login part, which is the main part of this video actually. So I go here, and now let's handle this part. And as you know that we are using the NextAuth for the authentication in Next.js. So this is the official website of NextAuth. And if I go to the documentation, you can see that here, this is the documentation. Now there are multiple ways to authenticate the user. We can use the social login. We can use the credentials login that we are going to use in this video. Then we will get the email password from the user, and then we will write our own logic for the authentication. Okay, so for that we have to use the credentials login. And if you go to the providers, and here you can get all the list of the providers that we can use with the NextAuth. So these are all the providers. We have to use this credentials. If you scroll down, this is the example that we have to pass here a provider array in this route, which is dot 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 nextauth.js, that we have to create in the auth folder in the API. Okay, we have to create a file with this name, and then we simply have to we will simply get our email and the password from the user from the front end, and then we will check that if user has a valid email and the password, and if that user has a valid email and password, then we will simply authenticate the user. Okay, so this is the basic example. So we have to create this file. So I copy the file name from here. We have to type here dot 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 nextauth.js, which is the dynamic route. So I simply go to my VS Code, close this file, and then I go to the pages in the API, create a new folder with the name auth and a new file with this name, which is the dot 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 auth and nextauth.js. We have to wrap that in the brackets. Now press enter, and here we have to write our code for the authentication. And here first of all I export here default we have to pass here the NextAuth that we will import from NextAuth right here. So I import here the NextAuth from the NextAuth like this. Okay, so you have to import that like this. Then in that we have to pass a object like this. In that we have to pass our multiple options. So first option is going to be session, that we want to use here session authentication, and in that I type here strategy, that what strategy we want to use here, that is the JWT. Okay, so it will automatically handle this session for us, and we want to use the JWT for the authentication. We simply pass this option, and then we have to pass here the providers array. So we know, as you know, that we are using here credentials, so we have to use here the credentials provider. So we have to import the credentials provider, import credentials provider from NextAuth / providers / credentials like this, and this is credential provider like this. So I use this here. Okay, and now in that I have to first of all I will get access here to the authorize function. So async authorize. Okay, and then in that we get my credentials, and then also get here the request object like this. Okay, so now here I can get the email and the password from the credentials, so I pull that out from the credentials. So I type here credentials, oh sorry, I will get the email and then the password from the credentials like this, and now we have email and password here. Now we can simply validate that, and for that first of all I import here the user model from dot slash models slash the user. Okay, and then I will simply check that const user is equal to await user dot find one. I find the user with this email. Okay, and I check that if there is no user with this email, then I will simply throw new error that invalid email or password. Okay, and then I have to check the password also, so I type here const is password matched, and to compare the password I will use here bcrypt, and we have to import that as well. So import here bcrypt from bcrypt.js. Now we can use bcrypt compare here, compare method, to compare our passwords. And first of all we have to pass our string that we have passed from the front end, which is this password. So type here password, and then we have to pass the hash which we have saved in the database, and that is going to be user.password, this user. Okay, and then I will check that. I simply copy this if from here and put that here. I check that if not password match, this means that the password is wrong. I will simply throw invalid email or password like this. Okay, and if the password is correct, I will simply have to just return from here the user. Now if I simply save it, and before that we also have to connect to the database, so I actually type here db connect that I also have to actually import. So import here db connect from the config folder slash db connect like this. Simply save it, and I also log here the email and the password. Okay, so now let's test it. I think so. I go to the app in the login in the page.js. I don't have to use here Axios like I have used in the register.js or slash register. Here I have to use this sign in from NextAuth. Okay, so I will import that here. So import the sign in function from NextAuth slash react. So from here I will import the sign in, and in the sign in we have to pass our email, password, and the provider that we are using. Okay, so I simply type here actually a try catch and just log the error if there is any. And now here I will simply type here const data is equal to await, and I call my sign in, and in that first of all I have to pass the provider. So in our case our provider is the credentials, so credentials, and then we have to pass here the options. In the options I will pass here redirect to false. Okay, I will make redirect to false, and I have to pass here the email and then the password. So in this way we will get our email and the password here in the credentials like this. Okay, and I type here log data. Simply save this one, and also we have to make our function async because we have used await. Okay, and now let's go back, and here if I reload this page, if I go to the inspect here, and just here I also have to use here HTML4 instead of 4, so that is HTML4. Simply save that and go back, and now if I type here like 1 2 3 4 5 6, click on sign in, you can see that here we get here status 200. This means that our authentication is successful and OK is true and error is null. Okay, if I go back, you can see that we get here gulam@gmail.com, which is our password that we have logged here, and then we have our password here. Okay, and you can see that we get here a warning for no secret, and we have already added the secret, sorry, here NextAuth secret, and we also have to add that. And to add that, I go to my nextauth.js, and also I remove this log from here, and here after this providers array, I pass secret option, secret, and then I have to pass here process.env.auth secret. Simply save it one, and now it will remove that warning. Alright, so now we are successfully authenticating our user. We are checking that if user exists in our database, and then we are simply returning the user if the credentials are correct. Okay, if I go back and go in the application in my Chrome and go to the cookies, you can see that Next has or automatically store the Next cookies in our basically browser. Okay, so this means that we have successfully authenticated our user. Now we know that the user is logged in and the cookies are saved. Now we have to display that user in the header. Okay, now for that what I do is I simply go to my VS Code, and I have to use a session provider. In that way I will get access to the current session and the current user. So for that I will go to the app, and in the header I will in the layout I have to wrap the entire body in the session provider. So I will import that here. So import the session provider from next-auth slash and that is React, and that is the session provider. Okay, and then we have to wrap the entire body in that. So I type here session provider, because we also have to use the session in our header, so I also wrap that and like this, and that is it. Now we can get access to the session in our application. Simply save this one, and we have here some error that React context is unavailable in server components, and we cannot use that in the server component. We have to make that client side component, and to make client side I use here use client. Simply save this one, and now the error will go. And we have here some other error. Okay, so I simply scroll it down, and now if I simply close this from here and go to the header, and then here I can get access to my session. Now for that I will use here the use session. So I import here from NextAuth slash React, and I will import here the use session. Okay, and I type here const session is equal to use session, and that is it. Now if I simply log here this session, save it, and now if I go back and I reload this page, go to the console, and here you can see that we get here our object, and that object contains the data which is null, and the status is unauthenticated. Okay, so I actually want to go to my application, clear these, also clear these, and now let's log in again. I type here 1 2 3 4 5 6, click on login. So now you can see that we get here our data in the header.js. If I reload this page once again, you can see that we get here our data in the header.js log. So data contains the user, so the name and the email of the user. Then also you can see that we have an expired state, that when this user authentication will be expired. Okay, so in this way we can get access to the user. So in this way we can get access to the session that contains the user. I close this one, and now if I go back to my VS Code, and let's actually pull out here the data. Okay, and then I will use here after this line that if data dot user exist, then I will display the logout button and the username, else I will display here only the login button. Okay, so I will simply move actually uh, this inside here, and also I add here this empty tags like this. Okay, and else I will display here the login button. Oops, the login button, and the login button is right here. Simply cut it from here and I put that here. Simply save this one, and now if I go back, you can see that we get here only the username and the logout button. We don't get here the login button. Okay, and now let's change here the username. So I type here what is that, data dot user dot name. I simply save it, and that is also Gulam as it is. So this is our uh, username. Okay, so now let's actually handle this logout button, that if user want to log out, we have to clear the session, and it is actually quite simple. I simply have to just import the sign out function from the NextAuth, and that is it. I simply go back in my VS Code, and here I simply just import here the sign out, and I have to just call that actually. And what I do is I actually don't need here this link, so what I do is I simply remove this one and also this link from here. Okay, and to this span I give a class name, sorry, style, not class. Give here a style that cursor is going to be pointer, and I will use here on click on this span. Actually on click I simply have to call the sign out. So I'll type here sign out, and that is it. Simply save this one, and now if I go back, uh, reload this page, and if I click on here logout, you can see that we get here only the login button, because now the user is not logged in. If I reload this page, you can see that we only have here login, and if I log in again, if we go to the inspect, you can see that here we get here that invalid email or password, because the password is wrong right now. Okay, so we are getting here our error message also. So I type here 1 2 3 4 5 6, and now if I clear the terminal and click on sign in, we get here our okay message, and also the user is also in the header. So in this way we can also handle the logout. Now at the last, let's discuss about the protected route. If I want to make any route protected in Next.js, how I can do that? For that I simply go back. Let me show you first. I create a new folder here with the name dashboard, create a page.js in that, create a basic functional component here, that is the dashboard, and I make it h1, and oops, give it a class name deflex justify dash content dash center margin top of 5. Simply save it, and now if I go to my Chrome, and here if I go to the dashboard now, so slash dashboard, and you can see that we get here our dashboard. Now for example, this is a protected route, and we want to protect this route from the unauthenticated users. So how we can do that? And doing that is actually quite simple. I simply go back to my VS Code, close this one, and create a new file in the root with the name middleware.js. So this is a reserved file name by Next.js, in that we can simply write our code that basically runs before the actual request is processed, just like other middlewares. So here I will simply export here default from Next-Auth slash middleware, and this is how it will work. And then we have to simply pass the routes that we want to protect. I simply type here export const config, and in this config we have to pass here a matcher. Okay, now in this matcher we have to pass the array of the routes that we want to protect. I type here slash dashboard like this. If I simply save this one, and now if I go back and reload this page, so it stays on the slash dashboard. If I log out from here, you can see that it redirects me back to the sign in page, and this is the sign in page by Next.js. We have to move the user to our sign in page, not the default one that is provided by NextAuth. Okay, so for that I go back to my VS Code, and here in the pages API auth nextauth.js, here I simply type pages, then I simply pass here an object, and this object I type here for the sign in, I will use the slash login. Okay, now if I simply save it and I go back, and now if I go back again to our dashboard, you can see that we are redirected back to our login page. And if I type here correct password, like I type here 1 2 3 4 5 6, click on sign in. Okay, and now if I go to the dashboard, and now I can go to my dashboard page. So if I reload it, now it is a protected route. If I log out, I go to dashboard, I cannot do that because this route is a protected route. And in the same way, you can simply pass here all the routes that you want to protect from the unauthenticated users, and it is actually quite simple. Okay, so I hope that you understand what we have discussed in this video. We have learned how to register a user, save that in the database, how to authenticate the user, okay, and how we can get the session of the current user, and how we can authenticate our routes from the unauthenticated users. If you have any question in your mind, make sure to post that question in the comment section. I will try my best to respond there. And if you want also check out my Udemy courses, you can also check out on my profile, and the link is in the description of this video. And the final source code is present on the same Git repo with the branch name called credentials login. I also add the link of that in the description of this video. And please let me know in the comment section if you want more videos like this, or if you want me to make some project based courses on this platform. If you want, I will make that also. All right, so I hope that you understand what we have discussed in this video. So I will see you in the next video.